Hello and welcome again to the AIEA sponsored series of interviews with the second generation of leaders after World War II who are now approaching retirement age, not retired, but approaching retirement age, and are willing to come and discuss the changes they have seen in the trajectory of their own careers in our broad field of international education. The first generation that we interviewed in the 90s under the auspices of CIEE came to leadership right after World War II, and we did a series of interviews at the end of the 1990s with that group. I am now part of the second generation. My white hair attests to that, and I'm thrilled to be able to interview people who've made such contributions to the enormous growth that this field has seen in the last 20 years. Today we are talking with Dr. William Brustein, who is in his current position Vice President for Global Strategies and International Affairs at Ohio State University. Dr. Brustein is a person who has had both an academic career in sociology, which he maintains to this day, which I find astonishing, as well as in leadership positions in international education development and administration, curriculum integration, the full range of activities that are typically identified when we talk about what the component parts are of internationalization. So thank you for coming to talk to us today.
I'm delighted, Joan.
Thank you. I would actually like to start a little bit having said where you are now, at the beginning of your career, and how you got first into academia and then into international education from a faculty experience, which I think is how you started.
Well, as far as I can recall, going back to my early childhood, Joan, I was fascinated with foreign cultures. My father was a journalist and would get papers from all around the world. And yeah. I remember when I spent time in Time Out, they didn't call it Time Out then. When I was naughty, I'd go down and there would be piles of papers. And
what a great way to
read them. And then I think the first experience that really began to propel me in what would become my future direction was when I was in high school. And I think I was a sophomore. It was 1962 in Fairfield, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And the social studies teacher came to me and said, the school received a letter from this high school in Lagos, Nigeria. And Nigeria had just become independent mm-hmm. from Great Britain, and that the school was looking to set up what we called then pen pals relationships.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
And so he asked me if I would try to organize a group of students and take part in this. And we did, and started writing to the, classmates at the school in Lagos, and they said, well, they really need typewriters. They didn't have pens, pencils. And so I mentioned this to my father, who, again, being a journalist, that we were going out and we were trying to collect, and we were having a bit of a struggle collecting these materials. So he put an article in the local paper, the Bridgeport Post, mm-hmm. and of all people, Meadowlark Lemon, I don't know if you remember that name, captain of the Harlem Globetrotters,
yeah.
who lived in our town, Fairfield, Connecticut, read it, and he called the high school and he said he'd like to meet William Brustein.
Yeah.
And so I went over to his house, maybe a very, very tall fellow, and he said, I love what you're trying to do. I'd propose to bring the Globetrotters to the high school to put on a game, and all the proceeds will go to your project to help you raise money to get these supplies they need. And so they came, the story hit the press again, and company after company came to us and started saying, can we help? By the time I graduated high school, this was the most popular committee. Everybody wanted to be on this committee.
Right.
We had, in this early 60s, we had formed partnerships with schools in Nigeria, India, and Peru.
Wow.
And Senator Abraham Ribicoff, who was Senator of Connecticut at the time, was so impressed. He gave a speech in Congress about what high school students could do. And this is during the beginning of the Kennedy era, Alliance for Progress, Peace Corps. And so it just, the lesson for me was that, boy, we can really help and that we can build partnerships with our community, our local community, as well as with international counterparts.
Right.
So I knew early on that this was something I was interested in. So when I went to college, I went first to my local state university, University of Connecticut. And after a year there, I realized there was more than toga parties. And so I talked my way, I was a political science major, and I talked my way into a new year abroad in Rouen, France, at the Université de Rouen.
Mm-hmm.
But they...
Were you directly enrolled?
No, well, it was interesting. It was a University of Connecticut program, just being launched. But what was so interesting is that when I went over there to apply, that is at the office at the University of Connecticut, they laughed at me. And they said, well, you're not a French language and literature major. And this was the thinking then.
Right. This is what I wrote about. This is so interesting. Yeah.
And they said, well, because I was political science.
Yeah.
So I said, why should it be just for French language and literature majors? They said, well, you're going to be enrolled in courses right at the university. They're all taught in French. You have to have a high level of French fluency. So I said, how do you know? Why do you assume that I don't have that? Because I started in third grade with French, and I can pick up languages quickly. And so they gave me the test, and I passed the test and went over. And that was such a key year. It was 1967-68. I spent probably more time out of class than in class because I was a political science major, and this is during the time of the worker-student uprising.
Oh my gosh,
So I became involved in what was called Les événements de 68. I was matraqué. I mean, I'm never violent, but I was in the Sorbonne on the day it all started.
Wow.
And so I got clobbered over the head by the police for just being in the wrong place.
You were doing all the things we tell study abroad students not to do.
Not to do, but I was just, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just in the wrong place, and I looked more like a student than like a police officer. And so because I was bandaged my head and I went back to my university, the French students just thought this was the greatest thing, that an American would sacrifice his head to their cause. And so they asked me to give a speech about solidarity, and I gave the speech, and I got carried away. And in the speech, I called for the overthrow of the French government of Charles de Gaulle.
Oh my gosh.
And this came back to, a month later to haunt me, because I was called in once de Gaulle reasserted himself. And I was called in, I was told as an American I couldn't call for the overthrow of the French government, and that I had to leave France.
Who called you in?
The director of my program. University of Connecticut program there at Rouen. And so and he said, well, you're not going to be able to finish the academic year here. Okay. And I'm waiting for him to say you got to flunk. And I was an honor scholar at UConn, and so I didn't want to get failing grades.
Right.
And he said, you know what I'm doing? I'm going to give you all A's. And the reason why I know you didn't spend much time in class, but you were the only political science major, and you got out there, and you took advantage of that, and you were a participant observer, and you did what we would hope, what we hope that our students who major in these types of disciplines would do. And so I made my way to Spain, but nevertheless it taught me a lesson when I became a professor, that there are students who will be more somewhat creative or go outside the boundaries a bit and think about that, and if it really contributes to their learning, don't be so rigid in your thinking as a professor. Mm-hmm. So then I knew I had to get back to Europe, so I applied to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, got a master's degree. They had me in Bologna for a year and got involved in the politics there, and then from there went and to Berkeley to do work in the anti-imperialist coalition, because I was a bit to the left in anti-war, and had a part-time gig flying for Pan American World Airways as one of the first male flight attendants hired in the early 70s.
You've had an amazing background.
But it was great because I worked with Pan Am, that I would do it during the summer and holidays. Right. And then I applied to the University of Washington for graduate work. And so I could continue my graduate work. My research was being done, my dissertation, in France and Italy. And my flights, Pan Am would take me there. So it worked out well. And so I became a professor in 1981 and left Pan Am. Had it was a great experience. And through my first 7 years at Utah and my years at Minnesota, my courses always had a strong international content, comparative content, and
So you knew what curriculum integration was before the term existed?
Oh, in
you
a
knew
way,
what internationalizing the curriculum means?
well, it's just that the way I looked at it was that for my students, if they could understand that the perspective that we have in the United States on an issue, let's say government policy towards guns, isn't the same in other countries, and there are reasons why in terms of understanding their history, their culture,
Right.
and I could draw from this experience that I had gained by
Right.
living in different cultures, having traveled.
Right.
In the same way, as a researcher, it helped me because I was interested in political extremism, religious extremism, and so I could, through my language ability and facility working in different archives, be able to draw in my articles and in my books upon comparative studies of fascism, for example,
Right.
of how it manifests itself in Belgium and Italy and Germany and France. So the international, I felt, made me a better teacher for the students and a better researcher. But I would say that the one experience that really turned a switch for me and that convinced me that at some point in time I'd want to be an administrator
Right.
was when in 1989 I had a Fulbright and I designed this project to take students with me from the University of Minnesota to do the largest study ever of who joined the Nazi Party and why. And you had to get into the Berlin Document Center. This is before the wall came down, where the U.S. Army controlled the 11 million records. And so my students and I funded them, got these grants and funded them. I got them to bring over laptop computers. Can you imagine in 1988, 89 what a laptop looked like?
Right.
But I got computer land to donate for
Wow.
the project. So the students came over during the spring and summer. We worked in the Berlin Document Center. We went through the cards. We took back a sample of 42,000 individuals, and it became a book called The Logic of Evil that Yale published. But I worked with the students, and students were so helpful. There were four graduate students, and that we co-authored pieces together. Many of them used the data for their senior thesis, for masters, for dissertation. But what it told me was that when you think about education abroad, it's not just sitting in a classroom, but there are different forms. And I started thinking, create study abroad programs where faculty can put together a team up with their students, and they go over together and they do research together, and so the students can be junior research partners
Right.
with the faculty. And so after I got back to Minnesota, I became director of the Center for European Studies there, a Title VI center funded by the
Yes.
Department of Education, chair of the Department of Sociology, and then all these offers started coming in saying, would you want to be dean, would you, or apply for dean of international here and there. And the one I liked was Pitt.
Yeah.
And is when I moved over to what they call the dark side.
Yeah.
And I took some of these ideas that I'd seen at an individual level, and I said, with the resources that I might now have access to, could I help design programs for faculty and students across the entire university, rather than just for my own research or
Right.
my own department?
Right. That's very exciting. And so you actually went to Pitt in a position of administration and development.
Yeah. Director of the University Center for International Studies. You probably knew Burkhard Holtz.
I did, and some of his staff.
Right. And well, Burkhard had stepped down, and so I became his successor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. In 2001.
So let's start talking about that then.
Okay.
When you were at Minnesota, which now of course has a very large developed enterprise in international education, it did not really exist then in any large form. And when you went to Pitt, Burkhard had done a lot of work, but it was still the whole field not accepted, still marginalized, still not often supported. You were probably among the first people to be hired as a dean of international. Did not happen often. So what were things like in the professional field, in the dark side?
Right.
And for the institutions, and what did you see your goals as?
Yeah. Well, let me talk a little bit about Minnesota and then Pitt at that time. At Minnesota, it was still largely seen that as international. international education, something within the College of Arts and Sciences over there
Yes.
at Minnesota Liberal Arts. So I was there a director of the Center for European Studies, and I reported to the director of international studies, who was Michael Metcalf at the time, a historian.
Yeah.
But Michael reported to the Dean of Arts and Sciences.
Right.
So it was truly, it was really
Right.
segmented, confined to arts and sciences, and even though scholars in agriculture, or in the natural sciences, in law, they were doing international, but there was little communication.
Right.
But the emphasis was at that time much on area studies. Minnesota, Europe, a little bit China was growing. There was a bit of an emphasis then on Africa, but most of the faculty who were involved were in the languages and literature department, maybe some from history, and a couple maybe from political science.
Yeah.
At Pitt, when I got there, and Burkhart, you're right, did a phenomenal job of putting Pitt on the map when it came to international. But Pitt, again, when I got there, was focused on strong area studies programs.
Right.
They had a number of area studies. And what I didn't see there, and what I felt was really needed, was to create more global studies, because global studies didn't exist so much back in 99, 2000. And what I thought of in that term was that there are individuals, students, faculty, who are most interested in thematics or some of these grand challenges. And that if we could create a program where we could focus on some of these challenges like sustainable development, conflict and conflict resolution, international communications, global health,
Right.
that we could reach out and draw into the fold of international people who had not yet been brought in. And what I thought of then was to try to create a program where we could bring together experts at the regional level who have the language and culture, and experts at the more conceptual, theoretical, higher theoretical level, who were particularly interested in these global challenges,
Right.
and to create a curriculum that would enable students to study some of these grand challenges like sustainable development at both the macro and micro level. So they could look at some of these macro level theories and then ground them in regions. And so we developed these certificates, because Pitt at that time had Latin American Studies certificates, they had Eastern European certificates, West European certificate, East Asian certificates, but a focus on just that region. But here it would be combining the region knowledge with the more macro, and so we created a global studies certificate where
And
they
actually,
have to
the term global was not even being used.
not even being used. It was
Yeah.
trans-regional, transnational.
Right.
And so that's what I worked hard on to bring to the University of Pittsburgh, so that there was resistance, Joan, because a number of people, first from the area studies, said, oh my God, William, if you create this global studies certificate at the undergraduate and graduate level, you'll be taking students away who might be going to our area studies
Right.
certificates. But I said, I think it's going to work a different way, and we'll see. That is, by bringing in new people, and since many of the requirements for the global studies certificate are similar to for a region, because what a student would have to do, for example, at Pitt to earn the global studies certificate, she would have to choose, let's say, global health.
Right.
Study, take the courses at the macro level, but then choose a region of the world
Just-
where she had to meet the language requirements and study that global health from, let's say, Latin American perspective.
Right.
And so she could complete most of the Latin American studies requirements while earning the global
Right.
study certificate. And so they let me try it out, and I tried it out, and we grew the numbers for the area studies as well.
Right.
So, and again, and I feel that it was something that had been limited in that, and it's been a cause of mine for many, many decades, that is that we can't, if we're really going to accomplish preparing our students to be globally competent, we have to think of broad ways to engage them, and our faculty as well.
Right.
And that this was an effort to try to reach out to students all across the university and faculty all across the university.
You know, when in the old days, more typically when you talked about international education, you talked about outbound students and inbound students.
Yeah.
But the reality is, especially with outbound students, that less than 3% of the total enrollment in undergraduate education still go abroad. So the only way to actually internationalize or educate globally is to educate on a domestic campus.
Yeah.
And that's what you did.
Right.
That's pretty remarkable at that point in time.
But even today, Joan, I observe that most of the emphasis, and particularly for provosts and presidents and deans, when they think of comprehensive internationalization, they don't think of it comprehensively. They think of it as student mobility, as you said, the inbound and the outbound, and they may think about setting up international offices or branch campuses.
Right.
But what to me is so important, you've got to have both an extramural and an intramural strategy there, and focusing on going beyond just international studies major or an international relations major or an area studies major, because particularly if it's set up where students don't have an opportunity to take 2 degrees, I have a dual degree, that you're probably going to get many students who are in biology, or maybe in law, pre-law, or in physics, or in sociology, who will say, no, I mean, I'm going to get my disciplinary degree, and I'll forego the opportunity for an international. But if we can find ways to internationalize the majors, that we could reach so many students, and it's so important that this global competence that we talk about is not just confined to a small cadre of students.
Yes.
And so that, to me, is something that I don't think there's enough emphasis on yet at our universities. That is, how do we internationalize the campus experience, the learning experience on campus?
Right. I agree. I think it's not, there's no clarity about how to do it, and you're describing a way to do it. Did you take that idea and, as you moved in your own career, develop it further?
Yes, I mean, I feel I've been so fortunate that things I tried out at one school and didn't work as well as I hoped, I was able to revise, refine.
Yeah.
And so I've been, as you know, as a senior international officer, I did 6 years at Pitt,
Right.
2.5 at Illinois. Now I'm in my 7th at Ohio State.
Right.
And there were a number of things that I and my team, we'd experiment with at Pitt and at Illinois, and I realized when I got to Ohio State that we could improve them.
Right.
And so let's take this, what we're talking about now, the internationalizing the learning experience. What we've been able to create at Ohio State is the global option. It's a curricular enhancement, and what we've done there is that we work with each college. We're very decentralized. Ohio State is a decentralized university, to help to design, work with them to design this curricular enhancement that will go along with their disciplinary degree, that does not add to time of completion of degree, but that is outcome driven, and that in my writings I've laid out what I feel are the 5 global competencies that each and every student needs to possess.
Can you state those?
Yeah, sure, if I can remember them correctly.
I know, I hate to ask.
The ability to work effectively in international settings.
Okay.
Familiarity with the major issues of global change and the issues they raise. Adaptability to and awareness of diverse cultures, perspectives, and approaches. The ability to communicate effectively across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Mm-hmm. And the ability to comprehend the international dimension of one's field of study, one's major. And so with those, we work with each of the colleges and their curriculum committees to help design a curriculum, we call it curricular enhancement, that will have the students reach a level where they will master those competencies, and that there's evaluation, there's self-evaluation, reflective e-portfolio at the end, there's the capstone experience, there's education abroad component, obviously language. I mean, there are a number of steps, but we try to cater it to that college, and that we've had them, a number of them, take the Global Competency Aptitude Assessment Test at the beginning and then at the end.
Right.
And if they complete the requirements, they graduate with their degree and with on the transcript, the global option.
Right.
And the college that has been leading the way at Ohio State has been College of Engineering.
That's very interesting.
Right. And it's been the professional colleges that picked it up the earliest. Engineering was first, followed by public health, social work, the College of Food, Agriculture, Environmental Sciences.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, they saw the need.
And is it because they are working there, but they've never had guidance about how to work in this realm?
Well, yeah, and they didn't want somebody to come in and impose
Right.
on them or dictate. I think what I learned from my other experiences to sit down, talk to them, and say, how are you with these global competencies that I laid out? Do they make sense? Is this something that could improve the learning experiences of your students and help prepare them for their next steps in their careers?
Right.
And they said yes. And so we said, well, let's work together on this. My office and their curricular.
That's really remarkable that they are leading the way. It's also interesting to me that you're doing it in terms of these competencies across the disciplines, because a movement I'm beginning to see in accrediting agencies in the United States is to ask specifically for information on study abroad students and how they are enhancing their majors, not just the broader term of global citizenship, but biology, engineering, architecture, what's going on specifically in coursework overseas that actually contributes to the accrediting quality. So that's really interesting, because this gives the accrediting agencies and the schools a way to start looking at these together.
Right. No. And so, I mean, again, I don't think I could have done that just at Pitt, but my experience at Pitt with the certificate programs and developing the global studies certificate helped me think this through a bit and evolve. In the same way, in terms of the extramural strategy that I brought to Ohio State, after my experience at Pitt in Illinois, started thinking, well, if we're going to have an international physical presence, how do we do that in a way that aligns to the core missions of the university?
Right.
But that I've been in public land-grant universities, and that, again, is cost-effective.
Right.
And so by the time I got to Ohio State, and again, what I liked about Ohio State, Joan, was that when Gordon Gee and Joe Ludo came after me in 2008, 2009 to come to be the first vice provost for global strategies and international affairs, they said, William, we're particularly interested in a strategist, not just someone who can oversee the shop and make sure that you know the programs are doing what they're.
The insurance is in place.
Yeah.
Right.
And I liked that. And so when I came there, I said, well, what if we were to create these global gateways? And the way we would do it first is that we had 6 international goals for the university. And so they weren't international goals for the international office. They were international goals for the entire university that came out of the President's and Provost's Council on Strategic Internationalization, that were embraced by the Board of Trustees, the Council of Deans. So we started with those and said, how can we use a physical presence now to advance those 6 goals? And I told Gordon Gee and Joe Ludo when I came to Ohio State, if they want to build brick and mortar campuses overseas, I'm not the person they should hire. I have a more nimble strategy in mind, and it would become the global gateway, the embassy model.
Right.
And so what I asked my people to do when I got to Ohio State is to think strategically. That is, look at our MOUs and our MOAs in terms of where our faculty have teaching and research collaborations around the world. Look at where we're recruiting international students from and where we're sending students on education abroad opportunities. look at, very importantly, where we have significant numbers of alumni around the world, because Ohio State has 500,000 living alumni.
Right.
And because we're a public land-grant university for the state of Ohio, look at the data from SMEs, small, medium enterprises, all the way up to the Fortune 500s. Where are they engaged mostly around the world?
Right.
And so looked at the data, came up with China made the most sense for Ohio State, followed by India and Brazil. So I said, we're not going to put these offices, which will be staffed by Ohio State people, on a campus, because what the campus partnerships overseas for law are different from what they are for the health sciences, and so we didn't want to be perceived as having an exclusive relationship with one university.
Right.
We're going to put them in the central business district, easy to get to, and that they're going to serve 4 constituencies: students, faculty, alumni, and our business partners in the state of Ohio. Mm-hmm. And set our first one up in 2010 in Shanghai. A graduate from our law school who was Chinese national, I put her in charge of the gateway over there. The activities have grown so much, bringing in grants, so many activities, that now there are 4 permanent people in that office. Set up the second one in 2012. I got a gift from one of our Indian alums. They were so delighted that we decided to do an Indian gateway.
Right.
And so in Mumbai, and so now it's grown so much, the Indian gateway, that we've moved into larger premises. And then for Brazil in 2014, got another gift from an alum for office space in the Moema district of São Paulo. And we're still right there now, but that's growing in terms of activities. Right. So these are embassy-like. They've advanced to 6 international goals of the university, and now it's become a model across the country. You can see that even schools like Indiana and Notre Dame call them global gateways.
Oh,
they use the term that we first do. But that came to me after, experimentations at Pitt and at Illinois, a lot of thinking.
Right.
So it was important that I had gone through this evolution.
May I ask you to mention a few examples of activities at those gateways? I think it would be interesting for people
sure.
to hear.
And let me talk about, start a little bit about China. When our faculty travel to China, the gateway is there to facilitate their meetings. Someone from the office will accompany them to all the university visits. With students, the gateway staff will help with the recruitment efforts. We have close to 4,000 Chinese students earning degrees.
Right.
And so the gateways play a key role in the pre-departure orientations we do in China for the parents and the students months before they come to Ohio State. They've been admitted, and the gateways help plan these pre-departure orientations. So they help with the recruitment and process. They help with our creating study abroad, our education abroad opportunities in China. They're always working with our faculty on campus to create those. At the same time, internships. The gateways have what we call the global internship program within them. And so that the gateways are there talking to companies to open up internship possibilities for our students. Then the alumni. And this has been one of the most significant contributions to the gateway. Our information on international alumni is terrible. And so when I came in 2009 and I went right to China, I asked our alumni association, could you give me names and addresses of people in the Shanghai area who are alums that I could meet with? And they could only come up with 9 names.
You're kidding.
And it was terrible. And so I got those 9 people together. And then when we created the gateway, through snowball, they say, so-and-so is a Buckeye, Ohio State alum. And the numbers have grown in the 2 years 600%. And so we have active chapters now. The gateway promotes and helps organize in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Taipei, in Hong Kong. But it's been wonderful because it's these alumni who have opened up opportunities for our students, for our faculty, an eye to advancement, cultivating them, which is part of what long-term strategy there. And those numbers have grown, and we've reconnected them to the university.
And they're happy about that?
They're so happy about it. And more of them are now sending their children and their grandchildren to Ohio State. It's meant so much to them. And then for our businesses, what we do is for companies that are looking to operate in China or are operating, we offer training programs, assistance to them. The state of Ohio used to have Ohio companies under the, what was it called, the state's office of the global, what was it, the Global Markets Division. But Governor Kasich, when he came into power in 2010, disbanded that. And so the gateways have taken that function over, helping Ohio businesses as they operate. And so the gateways, and the one in China, for example.
Well, that's a big role you've taken.
Oh, it's a big role, and that's why the staff has grown to 4, and they work really hard. But there's revenue generation there to help offset the cost, because the gateways have now arranged and worked out these training programs where officials, let's say from Hubei province in China, will come to spend time at Ohio State learning about how you run major universities, or one group from Hubei came over to learn about running family science museums, because we have a famous one in Columbus. We work with the National Academy of Education Administrators in Beijing, and they send over new presidents of Western and Southern Chinese universities to learn how to manage a major university. And so the gateways put all these together and gets a certain percentage of the revenue to offset the cost. In India, for example, it's because of the gateway the State Department came to Ohio State 2 years ago and said, would you take over the Passport to India program, promoting, being the North American destination to promote education abroad in India. So our gateway office in Columbus, Ohio, runs the Passport to India for the State Department.
Yeah.
We put on the gateway organized a major health science conference a year ago, January, that I took our president to in Mumbai with the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences in the area of biomedicine.
Right.
And so the gateway, and the gateway in India is doing a lot in the areas of advanced materials, helping our faculty in engineering, helping our faculty in health with their partnerships in India, facilitating those. And just one final example, because it's not fair if I don't mention Brazil. Mm-hmm. The Gateway played a key role in orchestrating the $1.4 million faculty seed grant program that we have with FAPESP, which is the National Science Foundation for the state of São Paulo, to fund faculty collaborations with faculty in the state of São Paulo. But the Gateway was the one that put all that together, worked with FAPESP to lay that out, and that's the largest agreement that FAPES has in the world with the university.
Wow.
So it's those kinds of things that the gateways have helped, and they've been instrumental in bringing in major federal grants because we have that presence there, and so when it comes to the grant submission proposal, we can state, yes, we have these partners, we can deliver this because we have this presence.
Right.
So it's helped them that way.
Well, it sounds like in your career, what you have done is both to imagine new models and implement new models and make them work, which is huge as part of the development of our field. So I congratulate you. And I would like to ask, in doing that, how you have worked with associations like AIEA. I know you were a past president of this association, yes, and you've been involved with NAFSA and ASULJIC, so many of the associations that have been critical in international education. Are the associations, has that been a helpful support for you to be involved with these associations?
Yeah, it's been, you're right, I've worked with first, AIEA has been the one that I've been closest to over the years, but then NAFSA and APLU, which was in nostalgic when I first got involved and helped to draft that 2003 paper called The President, called Action. Yeah. Where it's helped, I mean, certainly the networking, colleagues. So if I'm dealing with an issue through these associations, have developed good friendships, and I can call somebody or send them an email for advice.
Right.
And back and forth. But picking up best practices. Again, I mean, it makes me think, when I sit in a session, and whenever I get a chance, I like to go to the sessions, and I hear something, and I say, hey, we've been doing it that way. Maybe there's something there that I could think and try to shape so it fits into the culture of an Ohio State University. So, and these associations, I go through their sessions to hear what are the new frontiers, what's going on that I need to be aware of, that I could bring back to my campus. But also it's me, I mean, some people say, well, William, you come up with these ideas like global options, global gateways, IFTA. When I was at Pitt, I created all these different programs. Why don't you try to market them or earn revenue for them? I never went into business. That's not me. I mean, I love going to these associations and participating in panels and helping our colleagues.
You're sharing your ideas and models for free.
So they could make the case on their universities why comprehensive internationalization is important.
It is no doubt that the term gateways came from this kind of activity.
Yeah. I mean, somebody said, why didn't you get the patent on global gateways? You know, if it's going to help people, if they like that name, if it fits, do it. I mean, and again, because I think it became well known because as I was putting this together, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Karen Fisher, came to me, and she wrote a story about this concept of gateways that we were doing, and I think it began to catch on there. But I love these meetings. Keeps me young. I'm passionate. As long as I'm passionate about internationalization, I'm going to continue doing this. And some of my best friends now, I've met through these associations, and look at the way it's grown. Look at the way it's grown.
For every single one of these associations.
Yeah. No, and what we're doing is so important. So, no, I mean, I'm just happy to be part of AIEA, part of NAFSA, part of APLU.
Well, I think my last question, which this all brings me to, is the future. So you have really concretely helped to transform in the period of your career the structures of international education and the dimension, the expansionist vision of it to whole campuses. So we've come a long way, but there are challenges. And so I'm just curious, in your view, what you see as the challenges today. And also, to be honest, I'm very interested, your research in political extremism and religious extremism seems to fit very much with some of the challenges we face today. And if you want to comment on that. And also where you think we might be headed.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about the challenges, we have to continue to make our case for why what we do is important, and particularly how it furthers or advances, enriches the core missions of the university. So, because there's skeptics out there, and many will say, well, do our students really need to know a foreign language? Everybody speaks English in the world. If they're a good chemist, why do they need to understand chemistry from the perspective of a different culture? And so that they're out there, and then they will always say, well, how much, if we invest in our universities in these programs, what's the return on investment? And so we have to be able to make the case, and that there's a return on investment. And the return on investment, it not just can't be seen in terms of just the immediate cash flow, but in terms of long-term relationship building. If you want to, you can monetize things we do in terms of the value of education abroad to students, or helping a faculty member develop an international dual degree. Yeah, it may not lead to a revenue flow directly, but it's what, it's that core mission of the university in terms of the teaching and learning the research and discovery and the outreach and engagement. So you're contributing there, but we have to be able to make that case.
Right.
And not to allow people to put us on the defensive, saying, well, if I invest this money in vet med or in environmental sciences, I know they're going to go out right away and bring in a $50 million big grant. Right. So that's going to be a constant challenge. It's important for us to make sure, and I'm happy to see that over the span of 30, 40 years, people who hold the position we hold, we now sit at the cabinet level. Mm-hmm. We're there, whether it's at reporting to a provost or reporting to a president, vice chancellor, chancellor, which is good.
Right.
Because we'll have a place at the table, and we can continue to make the case, and we have to, how what we do advances those core missions.
Right.
But I still see that as a challenge. I just came from New York before this meeting from the CASE conference on international fundraising. Mm-hmm. And again, I think there's great potential there. But I think that our universities and our leadership has to look at it as a long-term cultivation, but also when they think of international fundraising, it's more, from my perspective, fundraising for international initiatives, which means that, yes, your pool of prospects, if you want to use that term, yes, could be your international alumni, but they're also people who live in your state or in your neighborhood or in your, in the United States, who have benefited from study abroad or from an internationalized learning experience and want to create a scholarship for education abroad.
Right.
And to make that argument that the pool is larger, because the struggle I'm having now at Ohio State that I didn't have at Pitt or Illinois is that the advancement office is less willing to invest in a position of an international advancement officer to work with me,
right.
Where I had that at Illinois, I had it at Pitt, because they are not yet convinced that there's enough low-hanging fruit, the term they use, or that there's going to be the gifts at a rate and the speed of what they hope for. So, but I see that as a challenge I know that I'm dealing with, and I always tell them when I was at Illinois and I made the case for funding for an international advancement officer to work with me, and I said, look, give us 3 years. If the ROI on it isn't 3 times the investment, let's sit down and we can talk about it again. And within 2 years, we brought in a gift of $14 million from a Brazilian to set up the Brazilian Studies program at the University of Illinois. So it can be done.
Right.
But our university leadership has to understand that you've got to take a bit of a risk here at first, and you have to have a long-term rather than just simply the short-term strategy.
Right.
Now, Joan, with respect to the research, which I love talking about, yes, my newest book came out. It's called The Socialism of Fools, The Leftist Origins of Modern Anti-Semitism with Cambridge University Press. And it was the result of an earlier book I had done with Cambridge on the roots of hate, anti-Semitism in Europe before the Holocaust. Cambridge had asked me if I had a project in mind. They gave me an advance contract. We agreed that I'd have it to them in 2009. It came out in 2015. So that gets to your question about how you juggle these careers.
But you did it.
But I took on for this book one of my best graduate students in sociology. I made her a co-author for Cambridge University Press. She deserved it. She worked really hard, and that enabled me to do it. Right. But since I'm a child where I had ancestors, relatives who had died in the Holocaust, my aunt was the only one of 9 in her family to survive it. And so from early on, I just needed to understand why this happened, how a civilized, cultured nation in Germany could have come to that point to support Hitler, and how we got through the horrific events of the Holocaust. Right. And so I developed this interest in fascism, in violence, understanding it, and in religious political extremism, particularly the anti-Semitism. And it's something I always wanted to understand, always wanted to study, and there's much more for me to do in that area. And yes, at a slower pace, but I don't ever want to give up my research.
And it infuses your concepts of internationalizing a curriculum, I'm sure. It is internationalizing a curriculum.
Yeah. And any chance I get to get back and lecture on or teach and work with students about that and taking a comparative perspective to things like political extremism and religious extremism, I look forward to it. Yeah.
Well, you've had an amazing career, and you've shared that amazing career with all of us. And I really thank you for sharing it today in this interview, because we really want to have the documentation of the changes that have occurred. And you have described, especially in the area of domestic internationalization of education, as well as mobility and outreach, how that can happen. So thank you.
Oh, Joan, thank you. And keep up the great work.
Oh,
I think this
you.
is going to be an important contribution to international education. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.